Hi, this is Steve Kropper talking about riding the rails in the 70s. My first experience with riding the rails, say being a hobo, was in January of 1976. That was the bicentennial year. About 1 a.m. in San Luis Obispo in California. I'd been warily watching a fellow hitchhiker as he and I leapfrogged each other, taking different rides coming down the coastal highway. Once it got dark, nobody would stop, especially for two guys. The magic formula then for getting a ride was to be with a woman. That indicated safety and people would stop. So it was a good exchange. Traveling as a couple, the man afforded the woman a chance for adventure and protection, and the woman told drivers it was safe to pick us up. But that night was just two guys. The guy was Dave Moynihan out of Delaware. He was heading into the Army. He'd enlisted. I was in college, and I was getting college credit in a sociology course from a soc prof. As long as I collected demographics on each rider, asked him a bunch of questions, then I'd get credit. And I still have that notebook, that diary today. We hopped a train because we could see the freight yard from the highway. Trains were moving, some slow, some in a hurry, and we walked over to the yard and watched the rail cars go by for a while. It seemed like kind of an obvious solution to our problem. They were moving, we weren't. So how do you get on a boxcar? Well, it's hard. The floor of the car that you're trying to get up to is high. It's like chest high. And depending on the rail bed, it could be as high as your neck. It was too hard to get up with a heavy backpack on. So what you do is first you throw your backpack into the train. Of course, that risk that you might get parted from your backpack if this train started moving, but you had to throw it in first because it was too heavy to climb in with it on. And remember now, the boxcar is moving, it's accelerating. Getting on a moving boxcar is dangerous. It's really stupid. You reach up to the open door of the boxcar, you use both hands and you hold onto the door and then you pull yourself up. And by the time you get in, you're just exhausted. It's hard work. And did I say dumb? Hopping on a moving train is dangerous, really stupid. So once we got on the train the first time, Dave Moynihan pauses in the corner. And remember, it's dark. He stops like he's listening for something. I ask, "What's up?" He pauses, he ponders and says, "Background music. Whenever you see movies about people hopping freight trains, there's background music, and I'm listening for Woody Guthrie." I learned to carry a rope and also a hacksaw for metal with me when hoboing. The rope is to tie yourself in so that you won't bounce around and bounce out the open door when the train is moving when you're asleep. You put one end of the rope around your waist, and you tie the other end to the wall on the inside of the boxcar, and that way you won't fall out. An empty boxcar rides badly. It's meant to be loaded with freight. When it's got freight in it, it rides comfortably, but of course, you can't get into a locked boxcar full of freight. When it's empty, it jerks front to back, it jumps side to side, it jumps up and down, kind of like a nervous squirrel. So imagine you're sleeping in an empty boxcar. It's challenging. One moment you're asleep in your sleeping bag, happy and hoboing, listening to Woody Guthrie in the background. Next moment, you're shot out of your sleeping bag like a rocket, and then you're jammed back in again. And yet, somehow you sleep. I always carried a hacksaw, a metal hacksaw with me, because I'd read stories of desiccated bodies of hobos being found in boxcars where the doors closed while they were crossing the desert, and a few days later the bodies were found. Or crossing in winter, bodies, frozen hobos in locked boxcars. So the hacksaw seemed like the best way to cut your way out. I never used it. And of course, there are no handles on the inside of the door. Remember, it's for freight, it's not for people. So Dave and I made our way east. How we got east is a complicated story, but I'll pick it up in Savannah, Georgia. So when we got to Savannah, Georgia, we got arrested for hitchhiking. We weren't really hitchhiking. I had a CB radio, and I was calling truckers for a ride, and we weren't on the highway. That's what defines hitchhiking. We were not thumbing for rides. However, Georgia State Policeman Olin Fred Burleson of Troop F determined, he made a judgment that we were hitchhiking. See, police are good at, say, improvising in these situations, and he decided that we were hitchhiking in violation of the law. He took us to the police station, and there the fine amazingly managed to be proportional to the amount of money that we had in our pocket. I talked to Dave, and I said it'd be kind of cool to have an evening in jail. And he reminded me that we were in Georgia and that was not an experience that we wanted to have. I deferred to Dave, he being a little more worldly than I at that point. So we paid the fine. We're a little poorer, wallet's a little lighter. And then I think I remember us walking to the South Carolina border. We'd already established that we weren't going to hitchhike. The officer had helped us understand local behavior. And we didn't have enough money to take the train, so we walked to South Carolina. My second time riding the rails was in 1976 with my girlfriend and another couple. We started in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Our first night of hoboing was not a success. It was December, it was cold. We got dropped off at the rail yard by some friends, and we warmed ourselves by the coal stove that the railroad yard staff used. Then at a certain point, we headed out to the trains. They gave us the most useless advice on what they called hot shots. Those were through trains that went long distance. What did they know? They'd never hopped a freight train in their life, and once they left the yard, they never saw the end of them. So those jobs, they put the trains together. So we eventually climbed up inside a boxcar. All night the train was moving. We were excited. We awoke sure that we were in Tennessee. Wrong. All night the cars had been going back and forth in the yard in Winston-Salem, making up a train, a couple cars at a time. We hadn't left the yard that we started in. Eventually the train headed southwest. We didn't know where we were going at the time, but we ended up in Atlanta. I remember one amusing situation that happened a couple times where the train was stopped and we waited for the two women to jump out and pee. We'd lower them to ground off the car, and it seems like as soon as they hit the ground, as soon as they dropped their pants, the train jerked and started to move. We two guys would reach our hands down, pull them back up into the car. A little embarrassing because their pants weren't necessarily put back in proper position. And we'd all been worried that the train was going to take off, and obviously leaving them on the side of the train would indicate a lack of chivalry. So then we'd drop them back down, try again, sometimes have another false alarm, sometimes they'd be able to complete their business, have a moment of peace. One night the train stopped in Atlanta. We walked out of the rail yard and through the main gate into a really tough neighborhood called Perry Homes. At a store out there, they had an inch of security glass between us and the desk clerk, and so even though it was incredibly grimy, we returned to what seemed like the safety of the rail yard. As trains pass, I noticed that people always stop and they watch rail cars. You know, a kid mowing a lawn will stop and lean on the handle of the lawnmower and watch us go by. A postal carrier out delivering mail will stop for what he's doing for a moment, watch until the train passes. Somehow, trains are magic. People always stop and watch trains. Then there was Christmas Eve in 1978, I guess it was. I'm probably confusing my years here. It was a while ago. In Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Little did I know that Muscle Shoals, Alabama was a center of southern rock music. We, however, were occupied with the train tracks. We were on the train, came in a boxcar. We got sort of sloppy and casual, and we had our legs dangling over the edge as we sat in the boxcar as it slowly moved into the station. Off to the far side, we noticed a guy in a station wagon just watching us for a while. Eventually he got out of the station wagon, and he had a gun with him. It was bigger than a revolver and shorter than a shotgun. And when he got close to us, he was aiming it at us. There were four of us. And he pointed at us, and he told us to get out of the boxcar, and told us to lie down between the tracks, the adjacent tracks, right next to the boxcar. Meanwhile, he's nervous. Not a good thing with a man with a gun. Aiming the gun at us, he's looking at our backpacks, 4 backpacks in the train car, and then he looks back at us. Then he looks at the backpacks. He said, "You ain't hobos. You're just stupid kids." We agreed with him. Seemed like that was the appropriate behavior with a guy with a gun. And eventually he let us go. We asked him. We said, "Can we continue on the train?" He's like, "No, you're not going to continue on the train. I'm a railroad cop, and I just removed you." So eventually we walked out to the road and we started hitchhiking. And my general feeling was hitchhiking in Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana and North Carolina, generally a bad idea, especially for a northern kid. Maybe in general, I'm not sure. So we got to the highway, and the first car to stop for us was Alabama State Police. We thought, we've gotten out of the frying pan and we're in the fire. So 2 cops stopped and asked us where we were going. And we said we're heading towards Memphis, points west. And they said, "We're going to deport you to the border," which is where we were heading. So they put 4 of us in the back of the car. Imagine 4 people in the back of a police car plus backpacks with tents, sleeping bags, cook stoves, food, cold weather gear, everything. We were packed in. And I asked him, I said, "Officer, could we put the bags in the back of the car? It's crowded in here." Not that you want to be ungrateful, but he said, "No, that's where all the weapons are." So we were quite happy to pack ourselves and the bags in the back of the car. So as it was, they deported us to a campground on the state line in the right direction. Next day we toured Memphis, and we ended up staying the night on a barge. Some folks who were running a barge on the Mississippi, which they call the river, not the Mississippi, invited us, and we put our sleeping bags out and slept on the barge overnight. You know, when you're riding the rails, you don't know where you're going, and you really, really don't have an idea where you are. You're on the lookout for a bank sign, a street sign, a post office sign, a Welcome to Anytime USA sign, and then you can look on the map and start to piece together where you're going. But of course, you don't have any control over where you're going. Hopping trains is a dangerous way to get around. We never experienced any crime, never experienced any threat from people, but being on something that moves that big, hopping on and off it, just dangerous. I've walked along the top, the roof of a boxcar when it's moving, just like in the movies, and taken pictures. It's pretty cool, but don't do it. It's really stupid. The best conditions I ever had were in a big red Cadillac, and the worst was in a cement car. Let me tell you about it. So automobiles are transported to market in rail cars, and they usually have a couple layers of them. So I climbed up to the top layer, and there was a big, beautiful red Cadillac up there. And I climbed in the door. The door was open, and white leather seats, nice big windshield for a panoramic view as we were going along there. That was the best view. Up high, sitting in a Cadillac, steaming across the country. The worst was a cement car. Imagine 6 inches of dusty, corrosive, gray, fine, flour-like cement swirling around you because the doors are open of the boxcar and the cement is swirling around you. At the end of it, you're grimy and pretty gross. That may be the worst place I've ever slept. I have 2 daughters, and I've never told them about these stories. I'd love them to try many of the adventures I had as a kid, but maybe not riding the rails. This is Steve Kropper in October of 2017. Thank you.